Let's switch gears a little bit here in our question number 2. You are also an active investor in sports franchises, including previously a semi-professional rugby club. What attracts your interest in sports franchises and rugby in particular?
I think it's a great transition from the first question. I don't think there is too much of a dichotomy between the first and the second question. It goes back to community. Where do you find the most engaged communities? The most loyal communities in sports. I talk to any, you're in Texas, Dallas Cowboy fan, right? Obviously, those go way beyond Texas because we have them in France as well. I grew up as a Raider fan. I still am. Lord forbid, you know, it's been over 20 years since I've had some satisfaction on the field. Yet I'm still a Raider fan. And what attracted me to the Raiders very early on is I was very sensitive to brand. Right. So, for example, here's a brand. Here's a rugby team, our local rugby team in Haguenau, France, right here for those who have video. Okay. Yeah. And something we're going to talk about a little bit later on the back end. Right. So what's interesting about sports is that you can directly engage with a fan base. You can carry a message that's a sports message, tag along a sponsor message in a very organic way, in a way in which it resonates. So and now I'm talking primarily about amateur sports and semi-professional sports. When you go into pure play pro sports, it tends to get a little different. But at an earlier stage, if you're looking at an amateur sports team, it's typically run like an amateur startup. You have a lot of volunteers, a lot of people that work for free, some of which have been with the team for 30, 40 years. They only have the team's best interest in mind, clearly, because they're not getting paid. Yes. They're diehard fans. They will do anything for this team to, in many cases, survive because the team has very little in terms of means. And then as a corporate brand, you can identify these niches, these pockets of opportunity, step in, sometimes for very little money, and help that team grow while growing your own brand. So the local team here in Haguenau, northeastern France, we've been with now for just a little over a year, that we invested in. We completely redid their entire brand, their jerseys, the derivative products, like the one that's right on this table here, mouse pads, bags, jerseys, the whole gamut, with a redrawn brand, which is their own, which is a historic brand. The club's been around for 50 years. And tag along our brand, Masters of Trivia, and growing them together in a very symbiotic way. Every time their brand is shown, ours is shown. Every time ours is shown, theirs is shown. It's also shown in a way that's engaging to the fan base, that's engaging to the press. So every Sunday, typically, or every Monday, sorry, because the games are on Sunday, the weekend games are covered in the press, on social media, and you can measure the impact that you have for your own brand, and you can measure the ROI, the return on investment, or what we call the return on brand, the ROB. You can measure it down to the dollar. There's software today that allows you to see how many times the human eye on social media, or when they're looking up the pictures of the weekend game, has seen your brand and put a value on that and calculate what the ROI is depending on the ad spend that you allocated towards that effort. And what we found out, and that's to answer the second part of the question, why rugby, is that if you look at sports in general, according to our research, internal research, and we spent a lot of time on that, the number one sport in the world in terms of ROI, sponsorship ROI, is ping pong, table tennis.
Okay.
When we saw that, we were like, wait a second, how is that? And you know, I have a late brother who was a businessman as well. He would only sponsor table tennis, and he had told me this already 10, 15 years ago, and I kind of brushed it by the wayside and said that he probably had one too many drinks to tell me this today because it was on a weekend. And it turns out it was right. So but very often it's due to extreme examples. So let's take one example. During COVID, we all remember COVID.
Yes.
We all remember that all sports games were literally banned as a result of human contact. When that happened, in places like ESPN, pure play sports channels panic, right? We had all these games planned. Now we get nothing to show. What do we show? What's going on? What do we have in our library? What can we show the people? What's engaging? Oh, we have the World Championship for ping pong from last year. Ping pong is always interesting to watch for anyone, whether we like it or not, right? But now behind that table, with the camera angle straight on it, you have now a game that's never been seen before, where 2, 3, 4 million people per week watch now these World Championship tennis ping pong organization, and the sponsor behind the tables spent $3,000 to have their sign there and getting millions of dollars worth of exposure. So you have dramatic ROI, dramatic ROB, return on brand, as a result of this once in a lifetime lucky event. Lucky, I put this in brackets clearly because it was during COVID. The second sport that comes close to ping pong is rugby. Here I'm going to take another example, driven purely by metrics. If you're looking, for example, at the French national soccer team, as you call it in the US, soccer versus football, even though we play with a foot, you typically, now we have the Euro Cup going on as we speak. France is qualified for the round of 16, which they will play on Monday against Belgium. There will be roughly 12 to 15 million people, French people, watching that game, give or take. The rugby team tonight, which is the final between Toulouse and Bordeaux, for what's called top 14, top tier, the equivalent of the NFL in the US, will be roughly watched by 8 million people. So give or take a little bit more than half the soccer. But the 30-second TV spot on the soccer game costs 50 times more than the 30-second spot on the rugby game.
Fantastic.
Why is that? Major delta. Well, the reason is what we call in the advertising business the upfronts. The first one is sold upfront, as the name indicates, ahead of time, a year ago, just like the Super Bowl spots that are going for $7 million a piece.
Right.
Where all of the big brands, primarily consumer brands, the Procter & Gamble's of the world, the largest advertising spender in the world, will outbid each other to be in that spot because there's a finite amount of those 30-second spots to buy.
Absolutely.
The rugby is not sold this way. It's on a first come, first sold basis. So you don't have this inflation going on, yet you're reaching the exact same person, the exact same butt is sitting in front of the TV station, in this case mine. I will be watching both games. So why is it that my butt in the chair watching the football game, the soccer game, costs 50 times more than my butt in the chair watching the rugby game? It makes no sense whatsoever. The impression is exactly the same. So we're looking for these opportunities. And in amateur sports, you have massive opportunity for investment. I would recommend any serious brand that's looking to generate positive, strong ROI on their brand to follow a similar path. If you need help with how to do it, you can contact me.
That is incredible. And by the way, Houston, Texas, where I am, has just announced that, and it's out in a suburban location, is the Houston SaberCats.
I follow them. I follow them on Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah. So they are, and I met with their. He's now part of my LinkedIn loop. Is their head of promotion. So it's interesting because it's just hitting in Houston also.